Central High School cheerleader Emma Walker has filed a motion for a new trial.
Gall sent his high school ex-girlfriend just hours before his arrest for allegedly killing her after their recent breakup.
A boy next door. He came in very polite, very nice.
Emma woke up that morning like she had so many times before, checking her phone, thinking about school, and planning the small details of a life that still felt wide open. There was nothing unusual about that day, nothing that hinted at how fragile everything really was. To anyone watching, she was just another teenager moving through an ordinary routine. But beneath the surface, something had already begun to shift. And by the time the sun set again, Emma's world and the lives of everyone who loved her would never be the same. Emma Walker was just 16 years old. She lived in Knoxville, Tennessee, a city where Friday nights often revolved around high school football games, where families knew each other, and where community pride ran deep. Emma was a student at Central High School, a place where she had quickly made a name for herself, not through popularity alone, but through her energy, her kindness, and the way she seemed to genuinely care about people. Friends described Emma as the kind of person who lit up a room. She had an easy smile, the kind that made others feel comfortable instantly. She laughed often, sometimes loudly, and wasn't afraid to be a little goofy around the people she trusted. But she was also driven, someone who took her responsibilities seriously, who balanced schoolwork with extracurriculars, and who had already started thinking about her future in a way many teenagers hadn't. Emma was a cheerleader, and not just casually. She loved it. Being on the squad wasn't just about routines or performances. It was about belonging. It was about being part of something bigger than herself. And at football games, under the bright stadium lights, Emma thrived. She cheered with intensity, with pride, and with a sense of purpose. According to those who knew her, she didn't just go through the motions. She meant every word, every chant, every jump. At home, Emma was deeply connected to her family. Her parents, Mark and Jill Walker, were protective but loving. They wanted the best for their daughter, and they believed in guiding her, even when it led to disagreements. Emma, like many teenagers, sometimes pushed back. She wanted independence, wanted to make her own choices, and didn't always see eye to eye with her parents. But underneath those moments of tension was a strong bond, one built on love, concern, and a shared belief in her potential. Emma also had a younger brother, Evan. Their relationship was typical in many ways, sometimes playful, sometimes distant, but rooted in the kind of quiet familiarity that comes with growing up under the same roof. Family dinners, school mornings, late-night conversations. These were the rhythms of Emma's life. And then there were her dreams. Emma wanted to become a neonatal nurse. It wasn't just a vague idea. It was something she spoke about with intention. She wanted to work with premature and sick newborns, to help them survive and grow, to be part of those first fragile moments of life. It was a goal that reflected who she was, compassionate, patient, and deeply empathetic. But like many teenagers, Emma's life wasn't just about school and family. There was also love, or at least what felt like love at the time. Emma had started dating a boy named William Riley Gall. He was older than her by 2 years, a football player at Central High, someone who, from the outside, seemed like a good match. He was known in the community, involved in church, and described by some as polite and well-mannered. At first, their relationship looked like something out of a typical high school story. Photos on social media showed them smiling together, taking selfies, attending events, and enjoying the kind of young romance that feels intense and all-consuming. Emma appeared happy. Riley appeared attentive. To many, they were just another teenage couple navigating the ups and downs of young love. But not everyone saw it that way. Emma's friends began to notice small things, subtle changes that didn't sit right. Riley, they said, could be quiet. even distant. At first, they assumed it was just shyness, but over time, his behavior started to feel different, more controlling, more possessive. According to those close to Emma, Riley didn't like her talking to other people, especially other boys. He would become jealous easily, sometimes sending repeated messages, sometimes demanding attention in ways that felt overwhelming. What might have once been seen as affection began to look more like control. Emma's parents noticed it too. They grew concerned about how much influence Riley seemed to have over her. They worried about the intensity of the relationship, about the way Emma seemed increasingly tied to him emotionally. At one point, in an attempt to create distance, they even took away her phone. But the connection didn't end. Riley found ways to stay in contact, reportedly giving Emma an iPod Touch so they could continue communicating without her parents knowing. It became a secret channel, a hidden line that allowed the relationship to continue despite growing concerns from those around her. Over time, the relationship became unstable. Emma and Riley broke up and got back together multiple times. Each breakup seemed more intense than the last. Arguments became more frequent. Messages became more aggressive. And yet, each time there would be apologies, promises that things would change, that the love between them was still real. For Emma, it was complicated. She was young, navigating emotions that felt overwhelming and real. She cared about Riley, but she was also beginning to feel the weight of the relationship, the pressure, the conflict, and the constant emotional push and pull. By the fall of 2016, things had reached a turning point. Emma was now a junior in high school. Riley had graduated and was attending Maryville College, about 30 minutes away. The physical distance changed things, but it didn't end the connection. If anything, it seemed to intensify the tension. Emma's parents became more determined than ever to protect her. They set stricter boundaries. They monitored her movements. They limited her ability to see Riley. And for a brief moment, it seemed like it was working. Emma began spending more time with her family again. She laughed more. She reconnected with friends. She even told people that the relationship was over for good. But not everyone believed that it was truly finished. And deep down, there were signs that something unresolved still lingered. Because even as Emma tried to move forward, even as she began reclaiming pieces of her life, there was still a presence she couldn't fully escape. A connection that refused to fade quietly. A shadow that seemed to follow her, even when she tried to leave it behind. In the days leading up to November 2016, that shadow would grow darker. Strange messages, unexplained encounters. A feeling, subtle at first, but undeniable, that something wasn't right. Emma may not have fully understood the danger she was in, but the people around her were starting to sense it. And soon, that quiet unease would turn into something far more terrifying, because someone was watching and getting closer. William Riley Gall did not look like someone people would one day describe as dangerous. He was, by most accounts, an ordinary teenager from Knoxville, Tennessee. A student at Central High School, just like Emma. A football player. A churchgoer. Someone who blended into the familiar rhythm of suburban life. Teachers didn't single him out as a problem. Friends didn't initially see anything alarming. On the surface, Riley was simply another young man trying to figure out his place in the world. But beneath that surface, there were cracks. Riley grew up in the same general community as Emma, surrounded by many of the same cultural influences, school sports, church activities, and a close-knit social environment. According to reporting from local outlets, he was involved in his church and had friendships that appeared stable. There is no widely documented history of severe childhood abuse or criminal behavior prior to this case. In fact, one of the most unsettling aspects of Riley's story is how unremarkable his background seemed. Because it meant that when things began to change, they did so quietly. Friends described Riley as more reserved than others. He could be funny, even playful. But there was also a side of him that seemed withdrawn. He wasn't always easy to read. And while that alone isn't unusual, over time, people began to notice that his emotional responses, especially in relationships, could become intense. When Riley met Emma, something shifted. At first, it looked like infatuation. He was drawn to her energy, her warmth, the way she lit up the spaces around her. But as their relationship developed, that attraction appeared to deepen into something far more consuming. According to testimony and witness accounts later presented in court, Riley became increasingly attached to Emma in a way that went beyond typical teenage affection. He wanted constant communication, constant reassurance, constant presence. And when he didn't get it, he struggled. Friends of Emma would later say that Riley didn't like her interacting with others, especially other boys. He would question her, message her repeatedly, and sometimes react strongly if she didn't respond quickly enough. What began as attention slowly turned into pressure, then control. This pattern, intense attachment followed by emotional volatility, is something experts often associate with unhealthy relationship dynamics. While there is no public record of a formal mental health diagnosis for Riley, his behavior, as described in court documents and witness testimony, suggested difficulty managing rejection, insecurity, and emotional regulation. The relationship became a cycle. Breakups followed by reconciliation, arguments followed by apologies, harsh words followed by declarations of love. Riley would reportedly send Emma multiple messages in quick succession, sometimes calling her repeatedly. And when things seemed to fall apart, he would try to pull her back in, promising change, promising commitment. But the underlying issues never disappeared. As time went on, Riley's behavior appeared to escalate. According to Knox News reporting, he once sent Emma a message saying, "You're dead to me. I'll check the obituary." While it may have been said in anger, statements like that would later take on a chilling significance. By 2016, the relationship had become increasingly unstable. Riley had graduated from high school and enrolled at Maryville College, one about 30 minutes away from Knoxville. The transition should have marked a new chapter in his life, a chance to grow, to gain independence, to move forward. But instead, it seemed to intensify his fixation on Emma. Distance didn't weaken the connection. It made it more strained, more desperate. Emma, meanwhile, was beginning to pull away. With encouragement from her parents and support from friends, she started to create space between herself and Riley. There were moments where she seemed to return to her old self, spending time with family, focusing on school, reconnecting with friends. For Riley, this shift was difficult to accept. According to testimony, he continued to reach out to her persistently. Calls, messages, attempts to see her. Even after breakups, he struggled to let go. And when Emma tried to enforce boundaries, his behavior reportedly became more erratic. In November 2016, the situation reached a critical point. Emma had told friends that she was done with the relationship. She had seen photos of Riley with other girls at college, and it reinforced her decision to move on. To her, it was closure. To Riley, it may have felt like something else entirely, rejection. And for someone already struggling with control and attachment, rejection can become a powerful trigger. Around this time, Riley began telling friends something unusual. According to court records and witness statements, he claimed that he had been kidnapped. The story didn't make sense. Details were inconsistent, and some of his friends didn't believe him. But what stood out wasn't just the story itself, it was the timing. It happened shortly after Emma had firmly ended the relationship. Then came the gun. Riley reportedly had access to a firearm belonging to his grandfather. According to testimony, He showed the gun to at least one friend and later asked others about how to remove fingerprints from it. These conversations would later become critical pieces of evidence. At the time, however, they were just fragments, concerning but not yet connected to anything concrete. Still, there were warning signs. Riley's behavior was becoming more unpredictable, more secretive, more intense. And then there were the events just days before Emma's death. She began receiving strange text messages from an unknown number, messages that were threatening, messages that suggested someone was watching her. Even one message reportedly warned her to come outside alone if she didn't want someone she loved to be hurt. Emma believed it might be a prank, possibly connected to Riley or his friends. But the messages didn't stop. And then, one night, something even stranger happened. Emma and a friend went outside after receiving another message. There, near the house, they found Riley lying on the ground, claiming he had been kidnapped and didn't know how he got there. It was a moment that didn't make sense, a moment that raised questions, a moment that, in hindsight, would become deeply unsettling because it suggested planning, manipulation, and a willingness to create fear. Despite everything, Emma still reached out to Riley later, reportedly texting him during a moment of fear when someone was seen near her house. It was a complicated dynamic, one shaped by months of emotional entanglement. But by then, something had already shifted. The lines between reality and manipulation were beginning to blur. Riley was no longer just an ex-boyfriend struggling to move on. He was becoming something else, something more dangerous. In the early hours of November 20th, 2016, as Knoxville slept and Emma lay in her bedroom, Riley made a series of decisions that would change everything. He left Maryville, he got into his car, and he started driving toward Emma's home. What happened next would shock an entire community and reveal just how far obsession can go when it's left unchecked. The final night of Emma Walker's life did not begin with fear. It began quietly, like so many other nights before it. On Sunday, November 20th, 2016, the Walker household in Knoxville was calm. There was no visible sign of danger. No indication that anything was about to happen that would permanently alter the lives of everyone inside that home. Emma had spent part of the evening like any other teenager. She spoke with her friend Keegan about schoolwork, something ordinary, something forgettable. There were assignments due, responsibilities waiting, a future still unfolding. By all accounts, she seemed like herself. There was no panic, no urgency, no sign that she felt threatened in that moment. Sometime around midnight, Emma went to bed. Her room, familiar, safe, her own space, became the place where everything would end. Meanwhile, 30 minutes away. At Maryville College, Riley Gall was not asleep. Instead, he was escalating. According to investigators, Riley borrowed his roommate's phone shortly after midnight, but using that phone, he called Emma. What was said during that call would later become part of the case. Riley claimed Emma told him she had no interest in getting back together, that the relationship was over, that there was nothing left to fix. The call ended abruptly, and something inside him shifted, the escalation. After the call, Riley began texting, again and again and again. Dozens of messages, phone calls, nearly 40 attempts to reach her, voicemails, a relentless attempt to force communication. But Emma didn't respond. She stayed silent. For the first time in a long time, she didn't engage. And that silence may have been the trigger. The drive's cell phone data later revealed something critical. Riley did not stay in Maryville. Instead, shortly after midnight, he got into his car and began driving toward Knoxville, toward Emma, toward the place he had already been seen lurking just days earlier. The drive would have taken around 30 minutes, enough time to think, enough time to plan, enough time to decide. Inside the Walker home, Around 2:30 to 3 a.m., something disturbed the stillness of the house. Emma's father, Mark Walker, woke up. He later told investigators he heard what sounded like movement, like someone inside the home. Then, a door slamming. Not once, but twice. He got out of bed, checked the house, looked into Emma's room. Everything appeared normal. She was in bed, asleep. Nothing seemed out of place, no broken windows, no forced entry, no visible threat. Believing it may have been nothing, just a misheard noise, he returned to bed. But what he didn't know was that the danger had never entered the house at all. Outside the window in the darkness, just feet away from Emma's bedroom window, someone was standing. Investigators would later determine the shooter was positioned approximately 4 to 5 feet from the house. Close. Deliberately close. Close enough to know exactly where to aim. The shots came sometime between 2:30 and 3 a.m. 2 bullets were fired, both directed into Emma's bedroom. One struck the wall, traveling through it and into her bed. The other hit her, behind her left ear. According to medical findings, the shot likely killed her instantly. She never woke up. She never saw it coming. She never had the chance to react. The second bullet lodged in her pillow, a chilling detail, because it meant the shooter knew where she was lying, knew the layout, knew the position of her bed. This was not random. This was targeted. The morning at around 6 a.m., Emma's mother, Jill Walker, went to wake her daughter for school. Just another morning. Just another routine. She called her name. No response. She touched her leg. Still nothing. And in that moment, everything changed. Emma's skin was cold. Her lips had turned blue. Jill immediately knew something was terribly wrong. She checked for a pulse. There was none. She called 911, her voice shaking, breaking, telling the operator her daughter wasn't waking up. At first, it wasn't clear what had happened. There was a small amount of blood near Emma's mouth. It appeared briefly that she may have been sick, that she had vomited, that something internal had gone wrong. But when police arrived, they noticed something else. A small hole in the wall, unmistakable, a bullet hole. Toward the realization, officers began examining the outside of the home. That's when they found it, another bullet hole, aligned with the first. Both shots had come from outside. Both had entered Emma's room. 2 shell casings were found nearby, and suddenly, the narrative shifted completely. This wasn't a medical emergency. This wasn't an accident. This was a homicide. A calculated act carried out in the middle of the night. Someone had stood outside that house, aimed into a teenage girl's bedroom, and pulled the trigger twice. The immediate aftermath news spread quickly through Central High School. Students were shocked, teachers devastated. A candlelight vigil was organized. Friends gathered, many unable to process what had happened. Emma, the girl they had just seen days before, was gone. Social media filled with tributes, photos, memories, messages of disbelief. And among those messages were posts from Riley Gall, grieving, expressing sadness, acting like someone who had lost someone he loved. But behind the scenes, investigators were already beginning to question everything, because one name kept coming up again and again and again. A troubling pattern. Emma's friends told police about the relationship, the control, the jealousy, the obsession, the threats, the constant messaging, the inability to let go. And then, the incident just days earlier, the strange texts, the mysterious man in black, the kidnapping story Riley had told. None of it made sense, but all of it pointed in one direction. Detectives began to look closer at Riley, at his movements, at his phone data, at his behavior. And what they would uncover next would turn suspicion into something much more serious. Cliffhanger. Because within days, investigators would discover evidence that placed Riley exactly where he said he wasn't. And they would learn that the gun used in the murder had never been missing at all. In the days following Emma Walker's death, grief moved quickly through Knoxville, but so did suspicion. At first, the case appeared chilling but uncertain. A teenage girl killed in her own bedroom by gunfire from outside. No forced entry, no immediate witnesses, no obvious suspects standing at the scene. But beneath the surface, investigators were already narrowing their focus, and one name refused to disappear: Riley Gall. The first cracks in the story. When detectives brought Riley in for questioning, he appeared calm. Too calm. According to investigators, his demeanor didn't match someone grieving the sudden, violent loss of a girlfriend he once claimed to love deeply. He was composed, detached, almost rehearsed, and the way he spoke about Emma raised immediate concern. He didn't call her Emma. He referred to her as the girl. It was subtle. But in a case like this, subtlety matters. His alibi, Riley told police he had been in Maryville at the time of the shooting. He insisted he never left. He claimed he had nothing to do with what happened. But investigators didn't rely on statements alone. They turned to digital evidence. And that's where everything began to fall apart. The phone data cell tower records painted a very different picture. According to law enforcement, Riley's phone showed movement. Shortly after midnight, the same time he had been trying to contact Emma, his phone began traveling from Maryville toward Knoxville, toward Emma's home. By around 3:45 a.m., his phone placed him in the vicinity of her neighborhood. The estimated time of the shooting? Between 2:30 and 3 a.m. The timeline wasn't perfect, but it was close enough to raise serious doubts about everything he had said. The gun, then came the weapon. Investigators learned that Riley's grandfather had reported a firearm missing. At first, it seemed unrelated, but then friends of Riley came forward, and what they said would become one of the most critical turning points in the case. The friends who spoke up, two of Riley's friends, Noah and Alex, told police something deeply disturbing. Riley had shown them a gun. Not just any gun. The same one believed to be taken from his grandfather. And he hadn't just shown it casually, he had talked about it, asked questions, strange questions. One of those questions stood out more than anything else. How do you remove fingerprints from a gun? According to their statements, this conversation happened before Emma was killed. A dangerous request. After Emma's death, Riley reached out to these same friends again, but this time his tone had changed. He wasn't asking questions anymore. He was asking for help. Help to get rid of the gun. He told them he wanted to throw it into the Tennessee River, to make it disappear, to make sure it could never be traced back to him. And in that moment, his friends faced a choice: stay silent or tell the truth. They chose the truth. The undercover plan, working with police. Noah and Alex agreed to help set up a controlled operation. It was risky, emotionally and physically, but they understood the stakes. If Riley was responsible for Emma's death, this could be the only chance to prove it. Investigators equipped them with recording devices, wires, hidden cameras. Every movement would be monitored, every word captured. The plan was simple: convince Riley they were willing to help, get him to bring the gun, and wait for the right moment. The meeting, Riley agreed. He trusted them. Perhaps because they were his friends. Perhaps because he believed he still had control over the situation. They arranged to meet, and together they drove toward the river. Inside the vehicle, conversations were recorded. Riley spoke about the gun, about the bullets, about details that only someone connected to the weapon would know. He wasn't confessing outright, but he was talking enough to build a case, enough to remove doubt. The moment everything ended. When they reached the river, Riley took out the gun. He was ready to throw it, to erase what he believed was the final piece of evidence. But he never got the chance. Police moved in, quickly, decisively. Officers surrounded him, ordered him out, hands visible, no escape, no time to react. Within seconds, Riley Gall was in handcuffs. Just 48 hours after Emma was found dead, the evidence builds. When investigators searched his vehicle, they found more. Black clothing, shoes, items that matched the description of the figure seen lurking near Emma's home days earlier. The mystery man in black. The one Emma had been terrified of. The one Riley had denied being. Now that denial was unraveling, piece by piece. The charges Riley Gall was formally charged with multiple offenses, including first-degree murder stalking, theft of a firearm, reckless endangerment, possession of a firearm during a dangerous felony. The case moved quickly toward trial, but Riley maintained his position. He pleaded not guilty. The trial begins. The courtroom became the center of everything. Emma's family sat just feet away from the man accused of taking her life, listening, watching, reliving every detail. Prosecutors laid out their case clearly. They argued this was not an accident, not impulsive, but intentional, premeditated. What they pointed to, the history of obsession and control, the fake kidnapping story, the threatening messages, the stolen gun, the calculated positioning outside her window, and perhaps most importantly, the shot placement, because the bullets weren't random. They were directed into her bed, where she was sleeping. The defense argument Riley's defense team did not deny that he fired the shots. Instead, they presented a different narrative. They claimed it was reckless, a terrible, unimaginable mistake. According to them, Riley never intended to kill Emma. They argued he was trying to scare her, to frighten her enough that she would reach out to him again, that she would need him, that he could save her and rebuild the relationship. It was a disturbing argument, one that painted a picture of obsession so deep. It blurred the line between manipulation and violence. The verdict. After hearing all the evidence, the jury deliberated. Then, the moment came. The courtroom stood still, silent, waiting. The verdict was read. Guilty of first-degree murder, guilty of stalking, guilty of the additional charges. There was no ambiguity, no compromise. The jury had made its decision. Sentencing. In the state of Tennessee, a conviction for first-degree murder carries a mandatory life sentence. Riley Gall was sentenced to life in prison, with a minimum of 51 years before he could even be considered for parole. He would not walk free as a young man, or even a middle-aged one, if ever. The courtroom aftermath, Emma's family listened as the sentence was delivered. There was no relief, no sense of closure. Because no sentence could bring her back. No verdict could undo what had been done. Her mother, her father, her brother, all left with a silence that would never fully fade. Riley's statement. At sentencing, Riley addressed the court. He claimed he never intended to harm Emma, that his actions were misguided, that he wanted to scare her, to force her to reconnect with him. But by then, those words carried little weight, because intention had already been judged, and the outcome was irreversible. After the courtroom emptied and the headlines began to fade, what remained was something far quieter and far heavier, an absence, not just in the Walker home, but across an entire community in Knoxville. Because Emma Walker had never just been one person. She had been a daughter, a sister, a friend, a teammate, in a future that had been in motion, suddenly violently stopped. and the people who loved her were left to figure out how to keep living in a world where she no longer existed. The Walker family. For Mark and Jill Walker, grief didn't arrive all at once. It unfolded in waves. The first wave was shock, the kind that makes everything feel unreal, the kind that tricks your mind into believing that maybe this is a mistake, that maybe she's still upstairs, still sleeping, still there. But reality always returns, and when it does, it brings something heavier: finality. Emma wasn't coming back, not tomorrow, not next week, not ever. Her room remained, filled with her things, her memories, her presence frozen in time. Clothes she would never wear again. Schoolwork she would never finish. Dreams she would never get to chase. A life paused at 16. Emma should have graduated high school in 2018. She should have walked across a stage at Central High School, surrounded by classmates who had grown up with her. She should have worn a cap and gown, smiled for photos, talked about the future. Instead, her family accepted her diploma on her behalf. Her cap and gown were placed on an empty chair, a silent reminder of everything that had been taken, honoring who Emma was. In the years following her death, Emma's family made a choice. They could let her story be defined by violence, or they could reclaim it. They chose to reclaim it. Emma had loved animals. She had dreamed of becoming a neonatal nurse, someone who cared for the most fragile lives, newborn babies fighting for survival. Those dreams didn't disappear. Her family carried them forward. A dog park was established in her name, a place filled with life, movement, joy, everything Emma had loved. At East Tennessee Children's Hospital, a neonatal intensive care unit room was dedicated in her honor, a space where tiny lives are protected, where hope exists in its most delicate form. In a way, Emma became part of the world she once dreamed of joining. The community's grief, Knoxville didn't forget. Vigils were held, candles lit, balloons released into the sky. Friends spoke about her laugh, her kindness, her energy. But grief in a community is complex, because alongside sadness, there is fear. How could something like this happen here? How could a relationship between two teenagers turn into something so destructive? And perhaps the most difficult question of all, could it have been prevented? A warning hidden in plain sight. Looking back, many people saw the signs: the possessiveness, the constant texting, the jealousy, the isolation, the emotional highs and lows. At the time, it was dismissed as young love, teenage intensity, something that would eventually pass. But Emma's story forced people to look closer, to ask harder questions, to recognize that controlling behavior is not love, that obsession is not passion, that emotional manipulation can be just as dangerous as physical violence. Where Riley is now, Riley Gall remains in prison, serving a life sentence under the laws of Tennessee. He will not be eligible for parole for at least 51 years. By that time, he will be an old man. In 2021, he sought a new trial, arguing that the evidence against him was insufficient. The request was denied. According to court records, his legal team indicated plans to appeal further. But regardless of legal strategy, one fact remains unchanged: Emma is gone. And nothing within the justice system can reverse that. The psychology of control cases like this are often described in simple terms: jealousy, obsession, rejection. But the reality is more complicated. Riley's behavior followed a pattern seen in many abusive relationships: control disguised as care, isolation disguised as devotion, persistence disguised as love. When Emma began to pull away, to reclaim her independence, that control was threatened. And for someone who relies on control, that loss can feel unbearable. But feeling something deeply does not justify acting on it. And in this case, that distinction became fatal. What this case reveals Emma Walker's story is not just about one night. Boy, it's about patterns, about warning signs that are often minimized or misunderstood. It highlights the importance of taking controlling behavior seriously, listening to friends and family when they express concern, recognizing that emotional abuse can escalate. It also raises questions about how young people are taught to understand relationships, because too often, intensity is mistaken for love, and persistence is mistaken for commitment, the weight of what if. For those who knew Emma, there will always be questions. What if she had been allowed to stay with her friends that night? What if the earlier incidents had been handled differently? What if someone had intervened sooner? But what if is a painful place to live because it offers no answers, only possibilities that can never be tested. Remembering Emma, despite everything. And Emma is not remembered for how she died. She is remembered for how she lived, her energy, her kindness, her laughter, the way she made people feel, the way she lit up a room, the dreams she carried, the future she deserved. Those who loved her continue to share her story, not just as a tragedy, but as a reminder to be kind, to be aware, to protect one another. Final reflection. There are cases that fade over time, and then there are cases that stay. Emma's story stays because it forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about relationships, control, and the warning signs we sometimes ignore. It reminds us that danger doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes it comes from someone who once said they loved you, and that is what makes it so difficult to see and so important to understand. In final tribute, Emma Walker was 16 years old. She had a future filled with possibility, a life that was just beginning to take shape. She should have had years ahead of her, moments we can't even imagine yet. Instead, her story became something else, something heavier, something that carries both grief and meaning. Her name continues to be spoken. Her life continues to matter.